Before we get into the episode, I want to point out a bit of a fun Easter egg. Often when I'm recording these things, I am having a beer, sometimes two. Today I'm having a Yingling light lager. I really enjoy light beers. They're not great, but they're okay. They're low on carbs and calories. Anyway, you have a few beers while doing this. And so a lot of my editing is me cutting out a lot of burps. I burp a lot. It's like a Rick and Morty skit. Well, my wife pointed out in my last episode, I missed one. And I didn't think it was that big a deal. And then I went back and listened to it, and holy fuck, did I miss one. I missed a extremely loud burp. I think around like the 15-minute mark and then onwards. So if anyone wants to have a bit of fun, you can go back and listen to it. And not only did I burped loud. So loud. And I didn't laugh after, I didn't giggle. I moved on like it didn't fucking happen. So yeah, if you guys want to have a bit of fun, go back to my last episode and listen to that. You never really know what's going to get by the censors. And by the censors, I mean me. Maybe one day I will have enough of an audience where I can pay somebody else to edit this. Or maybe there'll be some interesting AI function if we ever get to that point that I could use. But until then, it's just me after a few beers. So yeah, go back, listen to my last episode, hear me belch really hard, and then come back and listen to this one. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Heretical Heathen podcast. I am your host, Robert Knox, and this week we're talking about media, about story, about things being hidden behind the appearances, behind the particulars. Sometimes when you watch a movie or a TV show, or if you're reading a book, manga, or comic, you notice that the story's not what's actually going on. Rather, it's a container for something bigger. And in particular, this week, I'm going to talk about something that took me forever to finish. And that's Naruto. That's right, everyone. If you didn't already know, I am an anime nerd. But before we get to talking about what I found interesting about Naruto, I want to talk about the first time that I noticed that a story had something more going on. And that was when I was watching Rocky. I'm sure most of you have seen it. If you're younger, Rocky's typically considered like a kind of legendary movie at this point. It's a boxing movie with Sylvester Stallone. And the first time you watch it, you think, okay, this is just a standard boxing movie where a guy who doesn't know how to box beats another professional boxer. And while on the surface that's true, during my last watch, I realized that the story had absolutely nothing to do with boxing. There was a deeper pattern that was playing itself out, and the boxing was just like a container for that story. The boxing is almost incidental. What Rocky sort of is about, and there are other things going on, but it's about whether or not that, like, a man who's been told by everything in his life, by his circumstances, his neighborhood, the people around him, that he's just small, that he's nothing, that he's just a bum. And whether or not a man like that can overcome somebody who's already, maybe in virtue of just a good incarnation, great at what they do. Even the climax of the film isn't necessarily about Rocky winning the fight, right? It's about him telling his coach that he wants to go to the distance. It's about belief, about overcoming, and about the downfall of pride. And I think we see some of those similar themes in Naruto. So Naruto is an anime that's about ninjas. More importantly, two ninjas, and that's Naruto and Sasuke. Naruto and Sasuke fit your standard Goku Vegeta pattern. Naruto is a dope, but he's lovable. He's an idiot, but he has strength of heart. Sasuke is arrogant, but he's intelligent, and he works hard, and he excels at everything he does. The entire village is suspect about Naruto, and they treat him terribly. He's treated as a social pariah, and in some ways he sort of leans into that, mostly to get attention. He defaces stuff, he causes havoc, just because he wants people to acknowledge him. And in some sense, that's true of Sasuke as well. They recognize the danger of the Uchiha clan and the threat that they represent to the village. And so both characters are sort of treated as pariahs. And where that pushes them is diametrically opposed, which is important later. Both characters are, I guess, orphans. Naruto's parents die in birth, or not die in birth. They die when he's a baby. They sacrifice themselves for him. And Sasuke's clan is murdered by his older brother. And so there's a sense in which a lot of the anime and a lot of the manga is a meditation on pain and suffering and where that can take you. Naruto chooses to sort of take in the pain and transcend it and move beyond it to potentially break the cycle, while Sasuke ultimately ends up leaning into the pain and deciding that he needs to cut off his ties from everyone in order to be, let's say, the person in the shadows protecting the village. And this stuff will be important later. But for now, I want to take a little detour and talk about the tailed beasts. These are essential to the Naruto universe. And so the tailed beasts are exactly what they sound like. They are beasts with a certain amount of tails, 1 through 9, that each of the major village keeps. And they put these beasts inside of particular people that they call Jinchuriki. Now, if you're in the heathen sphere, these can be sort of like your Fyogia, except only more powerful and far more dangerous. During moments of peak stress and heightened emotions, these Jinchuriki lose control, at least while they're children. And their Fyogia, their tailed beast, starts to seep out of them. It creates a cloak in the shape of the beast around them. Now, when I first watched the series, I didn't think anything of it. However, after being involved in the ceremonial magic sphere to some degree, I started noticing this practice within the Western magical tradition, although differently and for different reasons. There are god forms in the Golden Dawn, where at certain key moments throughout certain rituals, you imagine yourself in the shape of a god, or you place an image of a god over your body. A similar practice is seen in the Vajrayana Buddhist schools, or at least according to some of the people I've talked to. I haven't read the text, nor am I a Buddhist practitioner. They have practices where they either focus on was it a tanka? I think that's how you pronounce it. It's like an image of a deity, and they sort of take in qualities of the deity from the image. And there are other practices where they place the deity on top of themselves, dissolving sort of into the deity and learning that you and the deity aren't necessarily separate. You are the same thing. And so I took some of these practices, I took inspiration from them, I should say, and I developed my own practice in which I place an image of a god over me. And I don't force the image. I might have mentioned this in other episodes. I let its nature disclose itself. If it wants to come in the form of, let's say, a white wizard, I let it do so. If it wants to look more like a chakra cloak from something like Naruto, I let it do so. And then I see what the image has to tell me. And it's something worth trying, though I will say that there are moments during these practices where if you do them, let's say rightly, though I'm hesitant to use that language, the god form can take over you. You can sort of dissolve into it. It's very much like a possession state. And it's not up to you. It will just happen naturally. And so I'd caution anyone doing this, if you don't have a strong mental constitution, don't do this. But if you do have a strong mental constitution, and you are the sort of person who can handle something like this, and you know that for sure, maybe consider giving it a try. And you might find that sometimes the god forms express themselves whether you're trying to meditate on them or not. I've had experiences where just walking at work and then suddenly I have that sensation of the god form surrounding me, and I can sort of see it in the imaginal plane, for lack of a better word. I've had other moments while doing a pentagram ritual where a god form will come and overtake me. And so just keep in mind, like, these things will happen if you choose to go down this road. I would highly suggest that you find yourself a proper teacher. I do not have one, and so I am out here just trying to figure out shit myself, hoping for the best. And so far, it seems to be okay. All right, let's get back to the original topic, the Naruto topic. Well, I guess this whole thing has been about Naruto. Fuck it, you know what I mean. I said that Naruto is about ninjas, two ninjas in particular. And while true, that's also not true. So the spine of the whole series has almost nothing to do with these two ninjas at all. It's not really about these characters. They're just symbols. They're just husks. They're containers for something else. For something like love and the chthonic, the light and the shadow, the yin and the yang. A bit later in the show, you find out that the characters are reincarnations of basically a space people. It sounds stupid because it kind of is. I guess maybe you could say they're higher cosmological beings and try to make sense of it, but when they first appeared in the show, I was fucking confused and left scratching my head. But they are reincarnations of Asura and Indra. Now, in Hindu cosmology, the Asuras are kind of like the Jotun. They're kind of like demons, lower beings. I believe they started as on par with like the good guys in the mist, the Devas. But then over time, they sort of devolved, sort of like how there's fallen angels. And Indra, I believe he's another Hindu god, and he's sort of like one of the top gods. But for some reason, maybe there was a translation issue, but in Naruto, they sort of flipped these. So the sort of solar arm is Asura, and the chthonic arm is Indra. And of course, Asura, he fits that classic pattern, that Goku pattern, that Naruto pattern, I guess now, where he's a lovable dope. He's got no understanding, and yet there's something about him. He's like a Buddha. He's very compassionate, and he has this power to link the hearts of people together. While Indra, on the other hand, he unlocks the Sharingan. He's smart, he's skilled, and so he uses his power, his will, to dominate everything, and he excels at everything. If this sounds familiar to some of you listening, it's because we have a similar story in the West. It's called Star Wars. Right? We have the Jedi, the light, fighting against the Sith, the dark. And neither of them in Star Wars are necessarily good or evil. They're just polar opposites of the Force, and there's always a balancing act going on. Also curious in Star Wars and in Naruto, at the final fight of Naruto, Sasuke and Naruto lose an arm in the final battle. And in Star Wars, Luke and Vader lose an arm. Now, if we go over to the Kabbalah, conspiracy alert, the Kabbalah is the tree of life. And the Kabbalah has technically 3 pillars. There's a left pillar, a right pillar, and the middle pillar. And the left pillar is sort of like the masculine solar pillar. Not really, but I'm just using these words. And the right pillar is like the feminine chthonic pillar. And so there's this symbolic picture where, in order to balance the tree, both characters lose an arm. So they can then walk together down the middle pillar, down the road of balance. They can take the middle way. And so the whole series, the whole manga, is like this meditation on pain from 2 different angles and coming to 2 different conclusions, and them finally resolving that issue, coming together and synthesizing, becoming one, becoming whole again, breaking that cycle of duality. Now I want to talk about one of the most complex and interesting characters and one of the biggest fan favorites, and that is Itachi. Itachi is Sasuke's brother. He is the one who slaughtered his entire clan. And the reason he did this was because The Uchiha were planning to overthrow the Leaf Village. There are reasons for this, it's complicated, but they were a threat to the village, and so Itachi was ordered by their Ambu, sort of like their secret shadow ops, to murder his entire family, and not only his entire family, the extended clan, leaving behind only Sasuke. Now, of course, Itachi doesn't notify the Leaf Village about this. The Hokage doesn't know. Instead, Itachi plays the villain. He gives everyone a figure to hate. He even joins the Akatsuki, a ragtag bunch of terrorists who basically want to end the world. Kind of, sort of. And he plays like a double agent. He's hated by the Leaf Village while also working for the Leaf Village, trying to protect them. And the best way that he can protect them is from the shadows. Now, why I find this so important is because we have a similar function in us. Now, if you've heard me ranting before, this is where I'll talk about the Jotun. Now, some people think the Jotun are external, and to some extent, some are. But you also have internal Jotun, and Jotun is often translated as giant, though I don't particularly like that translation. I like more like devourer or consumer, because these things get bigger than you and they can devour you, and in some sense, they always are. But they're not necessarily wrong. For instance, let's say I want to go into the woods at night and do a meditation. Now, there's a Jotun, let's call it fear, that is going to devour me. It's going to overcome me, and it's going to hack my biology and stop me from doing that practice because the woods are dark and where I can't see, there are predators that could potentially kill me. Not in my area, probably, but from an evolutionary perspective, this is true. And so, like Itachi trying to protect the Leaf Village, this Jotun of fear is trying to protect me. Now, when these things are playing out their role, you don't know. Much like Itachi, like you don't see the role he's playing until much later. And these things aren't malicious. In some sense, they're looking out for you and they love you, like Itachi loves the Leaf Village. They don't want you to come to harm. Now, sometimes in the Heathen sphere, and just the more general, like woo sphere, we hear people talking about shadow work this, shadow work that, I love crystals, fuck you. But they never actually know what shadow work is. They don't realize what they're doing. Instead, they're just basically doing mental masturbation. You'll hear the woe is me, I'm a piece of garbage, and this is sort of like, I guess, like young Sasuke and how he feels about the world if you're going to take it from like a Naruto angle. But what they don't realize, it's like, no, you're not necessarily a piece of garbage. What's happening is you have agents in the shadows, and they're doing their job to protect the village, the kingdom, the future. And you have to let those things take form, recognize them, integrate them, and learn to work with them. They are persons, in some sense, the way you're a person. And you need to get over this, like, dumb, bitchy, I'm just a awful human thing that we're all doing now, in order to see that Itachi is protecting the village. And for you heathens out there, this may also mean that Loki himself is not necessarily evil. Ooh, I'm going to catch some heat for that one. But maybe Loki, like Itachi, is performing a different function that we don't necessarily see. And a lot of times in the myths, when Loki shows up, it seems like key moments when cosmological order is broken. Right? When there's a threat to the village, suddenly Loki is unleashed as if he's like an agent of the Norns, and his function is to cause a little chaos and to get shit back on track. Or he's like a signpost letting the Aesir know, hey, things are going awry. What are you doing? Get back on track. And while that's noodling around in your brain, I want to talk about the probably one of the biggest signs and symbols of the show itself, and that's the Sharingan, the eyes. These are super fucking interesting. So there's this concept in the East called Maya. Maya means illusion, roughly. Now, in the East, it's often used, I guess in the West, I should probably stop doing this East West thing. That's probably Maya too. It's often refers to this idea that there's a cosmic force, let's say, that's creating a perception of a separate material world hiding under the ultimate reality. That existence is fundamentally all one thing. And it doesn't just stop there. There's all sorts of Maya going on at all time. When you have a negative reaction to something, that's also Maya. There is no inherent content to the experience. You're casting an illusion. You're doing magic. You're casting an illusion over the experience that tells you that it's negative. And what's so interesting about the Sharingan is that's its function. It casts illusions. Not only that, later in the series, it's suggested that the Sharingan is actually predicting the future. It's sort of only in like milliseconds, not very far ahead. It's rendering a model of the future so that you can act accordingly. And that's interesting because that's what your brain is constantly doing. It is rendering potential futures at all times. And so you're constantly rooted in Maya. Now, in the series, the Sharingan allows the users to cast Genjutsu, and that is a jutsu that casts illusions. They look into the eyes of the Uchiha casts an illusion, they are stuck in illusion, potentially suffering, sometimes not. Sometimes they use it just so they can get away, sometimes they use it to paralyze an opponent before they can deal the final blow. But what's really interesting is the people who get the Sharingan, like Indra and the entire Uchiha clan, actually become more steeped in Maya themselves. So the eyes that can cast illusions also can't see through them, or in some sense they succumb to them. Everyone who unlocks the Sharingan, typically through moments of pain, their personality changes. They become more like a Sith Lord. They start seeing the world in a particular way. And Sasuke's entire journey is through that. He becomes more chthonic, wanting to use his will and his power to dominate everything as soon as the Sharingan is unlocked. Maybe it was there a little sooner with the death of his clan, but it becomes more enhanced with each new eye he unlocks. Along his journey, he has to learn the truth of Itachi, that Itachi wasn't actually a terrorist, that he was actually told to murder his clan by the Leaf Village. And not only that, Itachi didn't think this was a bad thing. He thought what he was doing was right, noble. He was holding up order. He was protecting the Leaf Village that he loved so dearly, and in doing so, protecting his little brother. And even after Sasuke learns this later in the show through Itachi's ghost, sort of his ghost, sort of his reanimated soul, it's weird. Sasuke still doesn't learn the lesson. He still can't get beyond the Maya. And so by the end, he thinks the only way he can protect the Leaf Village is if he cuts off all ties and does so from the shadows. And the only way he can actually cut all of his ties is if he kills the one person he truly cares about, and that's Naruto. He never learns the lesson. Now, why is this important? Well, I think it's fairly obvious. If you just take 10 minutes to meditate on this and think about this, to contemplate this, that we are steeped in Maya all the time. There's so much fake bullshit going on. Not just from our own perceptions either, but from the devices that we're using. The device that you're listening to this on right now is constantly showing you Genjutsu. It's casting a spell. You're seeing a fake world full of bullshit all the time. And after a while, you start to think it's real. Now, in both the Western magical tradition and in the heathen world, there's a ton of Maya, and most people can't see it. One of the biggest ones that I've noticed is the lore. Now, the lore is obviously important. It tells us stories about the gods, gives us names, acts as like a proto-grimoire, I guess, in some sections. The occult sphere, too, especially with the Golden Dawn, people get really hyper-focused on the original documents. And they think that they can only do things in the original documents, despite the fact that if you look at the way the thing behaves, it's constantly flowing, it's constantly changing, it's in flux, it's like a river. The Golden Dawn is acting like a river and it's transforming along the way. And what some sense what matters is, does it work? Are you having the effects? Are you closer to the divine? Are you more enlightened? That's really what should matter. And in the heathen world, people want to say, well, you're not doing this the right way because you're not doing it. And I've ranted about this before, including on Jesse's podcast. You're not doing it as the sources say that you should. Okay, but I'm not a Saxon. This isn't the year like 300. Just making updates. I am in 2026. I have a different relation to the world and to the gods, and so my practice is going to change. You don't have to be stuck in this Maya, in these illusions of what it means to be a heathen or what it means to be in the occult, in the Western magical tradition, to be a Golden Dawn, or even. You're getting stuck in the intellect, and the intellect is creating an illusion. It's an abundance of air. You're building a mental model of the gods and of how proper practice ought to look, rather than sitting with them, examining them, looking at their functions, and thinking about whether or not they're working, particularly for you. The lore, the academic research, becomes a kind of costume. It solidifies as one, at least. You're not really studying heathenry. You're cosplaying, you're being a heathen, performing it, which is a huge problem with social media. Everything is performative. We're stuck in these identities and this illusion, and it's being cast to us at all times, so it's really hard to break out of it. Then over time, your practice becomes a way to maintain an identity rather than an identity emerging from a genuine practice. And that's a particularly vicious genjutsu because it feels like real commitment. It feels like you're doing something, when really you're caught up in a husk, an identity. And this effect compounds with a community. It sort of crystallizes. The group develops sort of like a shared project, a shared projected reality. And what counts as legitimate practice, who's a real heathen, who's a real Golden Dawner, is just what the community defines it as. And that illusion doesn't have to come from one particular person. Nobody's casting that illusion. There's nobody with a Sharingan putting a genjutsu on you. And yet, everyone's caught up in a collective illusion. It's sort of like the infinite Tsukuyomi, which is what the villain in Naruto ultimately aims to do. He is tired of living in a world of pain, and so he wants to use his Sharingan powers to cast a spell on the moon that will put everyone inside of a genjutsu. A genjutsu where everyone is dreaming the perfect dream. And much like being in a group, that's what it's like. Everyone is dreaming. But nobody in the dream knows that they're dreaming. It's a community genjutsu in like a single image. What breaks it in Naruto is somebody, I guess, with like enough integrity, which is a real big part of his character, and enough interiority, with enough real, genuine inner relationships and understandings to notice the seam of the illusion and to then break it. So what does it mean to have eyes that can see through the Maya, that can see through the collective genjutsu? What does it mean to see through the infinite Tsukuyomi? I mean, as I said, I don't think it's necessarily knowledge. You can read all of the books you want. You could be a master historian and know all the lore and yet be caught up in the illusion more than anyone, to be honest. I've seen that a lot, especially with a lot of the like Golden Dawn frauders. They know a lot of stuff. They can tell me the history of the Golden Dawn, but they seem to be caught up in Maya worse than anybody. They can't see the complexes that are ruining their lives, frankly, in some cases. Yet if you point that out to them, they will freak out. They won't accept it. They think they're more enlightened because they read more. This is a mistake heathens make too. Probably even worse. Now, if it's not knowledge, then how do we break it? Now, one way the show definitely puts emphasis on, and I think this is true of magical practice too, is relationship. Not to sound like a modern animist, but that's kind of true. You have to have genuine contact with the divine, with the gods. And that contact can help cut through the illusion because there's something real on the other side of it. The practice isn't like an antidote to Maya, but the presence might be. It's personal, it's devotional. Naruto breaks the cycle, not through like power or knowledge, although he is very, very powerful and that does help, but because he refuses to abandon relationship even when it costs him everything. He never goes back on his word, and that is his ninja way, as he often says. And I've done this a lot. I've gotten, in a lot of arguments, burned a lot of bridges because I can see through some of these illusions. I'm sure I'm caught up in some of my own, but I'm willing to take on some of these people who have silly positions or whose religious project is clearly politically motivated and has nothing to do with protecting the Leaf Village. I will be shunned by heathens and ceremonial magicians, Golden Dawners specifically, because I'm heretical. Because I don't necessarily fit into their projected genjutsu, their illusions, and I probably never will. And neither should you. Rather than dressing like a Saxon and telling people you're a traditional Orthodox heathen and the gods are space people, go into the darkness and see if the gods make themselves manifest to you. What does that experience look like to you? Now, rather than telling people that they need to join the Golden Dawn because there's some sort of magic egregore they need to be tapped into, try the Celtic Golden Dawn, or the Heathen Golden Dawn, or even Thelema, which is kind of, I guess, an offshoot of Golden Dawn, though potentially inverted, and see if these things work for you. And if they do work for you, then ask yourself, who is it that's telling me to fit into these particular boxes? Is it working for them? Or is it just one massive genjutsu? Is it an infinite Tsukuyomi casted over their particular sphere? Are they dreaming? Do they know? What happens if you try to wake the dreamer? Are their responses done from a warm, loving place? Are they reasonable? Or is Itachi hiding in the shadows, bursting forth violently and angrily, trying to protect the Leaf Village? These are just my thoughts on Naruto. This one might be a little weird, but I'm glad I did it. It took me a long time to get through. And if you're still here, I thank you all for listening. So, like, subscribe, share this shit around. It really does help. And the more views I get, the more likely I am to be able to monetize this. And if I'm able to monetize this, I can spend more time thinking and recording and putting out stuff for people, which is something I really enjoy doing. And with all that said, may the gods bless you and have a wonderful night. Thank you for tuning in.